Good afternoon, guys, and thank you guys so much for coming to attend my talk today on harnessing the power of social to attract and engage Generation Z. So just to kick things off with an introduction to myself. So I'm 20 years old, and I am the founder of a media company called Tap In. We've recently just rebranded from Student Inspire Network to Tap In. And essentially what we are is we're a media company that's on a mission to prepare 100 million young people for the world of work. And we run campaigns with employers to help them attract and engage with Generation Z on social. I'm an ex-aerospace engineering student. I was at university not so long ago, last year. And I'm obsessed with all things social media. So we're on a mission, as I've mentioned. We're a social-first organization, which means that the majority of the content that we produce is prominent on social media. We have a network of just over 1K micro and nano influencers who we leverage on some of our social media campaigns, focus heavily on Generation Z, and I think really important to us and our cause is that we're purpose-driven. We're a purpose-driven organization. So what I wanted to do was to make this presentation as informative as possible for you and really provide you with some practical tools and tips that you can take away post the presentation. So I think a good place to actually start in this is just in general about Generation Z is to understand that time and attention is essentially the currency for us, right? We absolutely, we spend so much time on social media, time in and out. We're always on Facebook, on Instagram, on social media, on YouTube, and we're consuming lots of media. And an interesting study was actually done in the 30s where they compared consumption habits with Generation Z nowadays to how people consume media in the 30s. And what they found was that on average, in the 30s, people would consume something like, 2 or 3 newspapers. Come in the morning, read your newspaper, read it again, and perhaps, listen to radio in the afternoon. Nowadays, we consume, on average, about 200 newspapers worth of information. So through billboards, social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, we're consuming the equivalent of about 200 newspapers every single day. And it's become a challenge for recruiters and people in general to capture our time and attention. But I think once you capture our time and attention, what's even more important is to get us to really care about what you're pushing out. So when we do lots of research, or if any of us was to go on YouTube right now or go on Google and search for the science of engagement, what you find is that you have lots of different research papers and lots of different resources from people who will produce very valuable information on the science behind engagement, but it really does boil down to just 3 things. The first one is convenience. Convenience is associated with the ease of content. How easy is it for us to find the content on the various social platforms? And we've defined quite a few, we call them Gen Z hotspots. These are hotspots where you find a lot of us on. And the first one is Instagram Story. How many of you guys use Instagram Story? Amazing. So Instagram Story is one of the Gen Z hotspots that a lot of us actually spend most of our time in. And what we found is that on Instagram, 60% of all traffic is actually now going through stories instead of the traditional feed. And what you tend to find is that we're actually communicating and having day-to-day conversations through Instagram Story and through Instagram. And the second one is actually Facebook groups. One thing that a lot of people tend to miss and forget is when we go to university and we join societies or we join groups, we join Facebook groups because that's the main means of conversation. If I'm part of the economic society or if I'm part of the law society or engineering society, every bit of communication about what we're doing, where we're meeting, actually goes through Facebook groups. So if you're looking to find us, one of the most prominent Gen Z hotspots is actually Facebook groups. And the second term is empathy, and empathy is to do with understanding things from our perspective. right? So a lot of the times people will sit in a room and they'll create their social strategy. And what they tend to do is they'll read reports, tons of reports that explain, all the different trends and the wants and the needs of Gen Z, and they'll create their social strategy around that. But what they fail to understand a lot of the times is by the time those reports are actually released, our needs, our wants, and our habits have changed. So it's really important to understand that you have to create content that is empathetic and in consideration of how we actually consume media. So when you combine convenience and empathy, you create an experience. And multiple experiences on a journey gives you engagement. And what we found is, on average, we'll require something like 14 and a half different touch points before we actually make an application to a company. So that could be through Facebook groups, that could be through an ad, that could be through Instagram, LinkedIn. On average, it takes 14 and a half different touch points before we actually make that final application. And on average, we'll spend something like 7 hours, really looking at your company, going into depth, understanding your culture, watching videos. Do you have content on Facebook? Do you have content on YouTube, on LinkedIn? So we really grasp a deep understanding of the organization and what they do. And something that we found to be very prominent and really important in our space is the importance of authenticity. Being authentic to Gen Z really, really builds trust. A lot of the times we'll see campaigns, right? We'll see recruitment campaigns from organizations, and they'll essentially tell us a fact. They'll run a campaign and say, we do this, and we'll give you this. And the majority of the times, they don't actually do that. And what you find is when we go to that company and we start working for that company, we leave because we've been sold the wrong message. So an interesting statistic is actually, I think 36% of all grads on a grad scheme actually leave their grad scheme within their first 2 years. And an interesting study by Edelman, they released a report this year, the Edelman Trust Barometer, which is a very interesting study where they asked a group of people who they trust the most online, all right? And it came across that people don't really trust the corporate message. People trust employees, they trust their friends, they trust their families, and they trust people that are very, very close to them. So really important to us when it comes to how you run campaigns, especially recruitment marketing campaigns, the importance of authenticity and really, really building trust. So one of the, I think, most important parts, and the part that I really want to touch upon in this talk, was the importance of really building community. I hear this term, talent pools, a lot. People talk about building talent pools and drawing from those talent pools to grab talent. But we believe in really building community. How can you build authentic community within your networks? And especially if you're targeting Gen Z, how can you nurture that community? There are so many opportunities that we have as recruiters to really add value to these communities that we're building. And one of these actually key examples is at university, we as, I keep saying we because Gen Z, but at university, we have this kind of weird juxtaposition between what students want and what lecturers want. A lot of the times when you're at uni, we have lots of lectures that are like, you have to hand in this coursework, and you have to hand in your dissertation, and you have to hand this in and hand that in, that we don't have enough time to really think about career development. So how can you step in and really nurture your community by providing them with valuable content, on things like CVs, on interview tips, and how can you really add value to them? Speaking to brands and speaking to employers, what we tend to find a lot of times is that they've got these massive learning and development teams, right? These massive learning and development teams who have the resources to really foster value in these communities that they're building. And I'm sure you've heard recently that Facebook and Instagram are thinking about really removing their likes, which means they're moving away from these vanity metrics of likes and comments and shares to really authentically building community. So it really becomes about how can you invest in building community and not expect any results to come out, but just consistently place yourself as a thought leader within the student space. So the next slide moves on to how you can sort of nurture your community. So I thought I'd put some examples in there of a couple of things that you can do to ease some of our pain points. The first one could be if you do some research and you find out that in your industry or in your space, lots of Gen Zs or a lot of my peers are struggling with interview prep. A solution to that is you can jump on Instagram Q&A, right? You can jump on Instagram and run a quick Q&A where you answer all of their questions. If there are any questions about interviews or preparing for interviews, or you can, answer all their questions on all of the burdens that they actually face during the interview preparation stage, that could be something that you do. Another pain point that we actually face a lot of the times is interview questions. When we go to interview, we don't really know what questions will be asked. There's this massive, clouded area where we'll do lots and lots of research on companies and we'll get 300, 400 different questions that can be asked. But how can you, as a recruiter, really step in and say, look, these are some of the most asked questions that you can actually provide, and actually create an ebook, right? How can you create a free ebook which you can push out to us and provide us with that value and really build community? And the third one is once someone is actually gone through ATS system and they're nearly placed, a lot of us have this day one anxiety, right? Which is we don't know what first day is going to be like. We don't know what typical day in the life is going to be like. We don't know what the experience of the company is actually going to be like. So what can you do to ease that pain point? You can create a short grad video, right? Where you actually go around and you give us a typical understanding of what a typical day in the life at your organization or at an organization actually look like. So what I did in preparation for this talk was I spoke to my peers and I selected a random group of 8 Gen Zs who I asked this question. And the question was, do recruiters need to change how they recruit Gen Z, and what makes an attractive company to them? And we've got a video actually with all their responses. A very short video, it's about 2 minutes, but I think it's very valuable in giving you some depth and understanding onto what Gen Z actually look for.
I feel like companies need to be more forward thinking in the way they approach millennials.
I think maybe with the humanities there's a bit of a gap between reality and what they want, especially I think there's a big experience gap.
I think they are doing a good job in terms of universities. We don't hear a lot about companies.
I feel like we've definitely got a lot of different options and ways to be approached than people did, let's say, a decade ago.
When companies do bring representatives into schools, I do believe that they should be careful in the selection of people that they bring in, because diversity and inclusion is very important. It starts earlier on than people expect.
As a graduate, I think a lot of these jobs that I was looking at didn't really advertise as well as I thought they would, and I wasn't inspired as much by the company.
Ideally, I'd like to work for companies that are really big and reputable. So all these smaller companies, although they might have a great purpose or great opportunities, it's just they're not being sent my way.
I think companies with a good working culture, so as much as it's good to be making profits, also think about the people that are working for you, because if the people that are working for you aren't happy, you're not going to make the best profits.
I would say that for me, the underlying principle is working for a company that understands that people are people.
I'm not sure I want to work for a company necessarily. There's quite a lot of NGOs that I like the look of. There's a lot of governmental work. I'm looking at civil service stuff.
I'd say companies that are forward-thinking, innovative, and that are down to earth.
Yeah, I think that I don't necessarily want to work for a company, and I'd quite like to work with someone or a business that's more personal.
So for companies that, if I can ask them questions and they can answer that question, and I know that they're right for me,
companies who are involved in technology and innovation, because I feel like that's going to be the next step in a way in moving this country forward or moving the world forward.
So that was just a piece of content that we gathered a few Gen Zs and we said, look, ask them that question. And some key takeaways from that piece of content was actually, some of these points here. And I'll pick a couple of them. Mentioned that the job I was looking at didn't advertise as well as I thought they would. I wasn't inspired much by the companies. A lot of the times what we find is we expect you to understand how to speak to us. We expect you to understand how to communicate with us. We expect you to understand what platforms to actually use to actually attract us to organizations. We have a lot more variety of ways that we should be approached, which is, something that you'd expect because we're a different generation. There's lots of different platforms to actually utilize to actually attract us to organization. Really important point there on, when companies do bring on campus, you should be careful as who they bring because diversity and inclusion is very important and it starts earlier than most companies expect. Stupendously important point as well. When you do bring people on campus or you are doing any campus attraction activities, really important to remember that D&I is stupendously important. The influencers who we look up to these days all come from diverse backgrounds. They look different. They do different things. So it's really important to understand that that's something that we really, really do care about. So what I'll do now is I thought about this. I was going to give some, bits of insight into like 7 or 8 different social platforms, but I thought I'd focus on just one and go really deep and provide extenuating value just for that particular social platform. So what I've done is I've selected to really go deep into Instagram. So Instagram is one of the platforms that we've seen a lot of success in. A lot of us, as I mentioned earlier, spend a lot of our time on Instagram and running campaigns over the last couple of weeks and months. We've seen lots of good success coming from Instagram. I think every month Instagram gets over 1 billion active users, and every day it gets something like 400 million active users. The majority of users on there, in fact 90% of users on Instagram are actually under the age of 35. And little do we know, a lot of niche communities that you can find Gen Z actually exist on Instagram. Another interesting stat, 71% are actually aged between 18 and 24, which is the exact Gen Z demographic that we are trying to target. So how do you promote your employer brand on Instagram? What kind of things should you be doing on Instagram to really promote your employer brand? I think one of the most important and prominent things to do is to understand that Instagram is a very visual platform, as many of us know. Video and pictures play a huge role in attracting us to really your organization or your purpose. And a lot of what we see sometimes is organizations will they'll try and take the message that they're pushing out on LinkedIn and bring that directly to Instagram, not understanding that these are 2 completely different platforms. So that's just one of the ways. And I think what I'll do in a couple of minutes, I'll give you an example of actually how you can really promote your employer brand on Instagram. So another point to really mention that really works well with us is leveraging your employees as influencers, right? And nano influencers. I think when people think of the word influencers, you're thinking, do I have 100,000 followers on Instagram? Do I have over 50,000 or even 10,000? The truth is, your employees are perhaps some of the best influencers for your organization they could possibly have. Getting them to share content about workplace, share content about things that you do, things that they love, genuine opinions. Let them take us on a journey on your organization, the things that you do, is one of the great ways to really add engagement for us and take us on a journey. And here we have some interesting statistics that we have brought up through running various campaigns with macro, micro, and nano influencers. So for those that don't know, macro influencers are influencers that usually have over 100,000 followers. That could be on Instagram, that could be on Facebook or whatever. Micro is in that 10K to 100K range, and nano is anything less than 10K. We call those nano influencers. Now what we've found is that with macro influencers, typical engagement rates usually lie under 3%, which is absolutely ridiculous. And if you look at micro influencers, that's between 5 and 15%. But when we look at nano influencers, what we actually found is typical engagement rates usually lie between 50 and 80%, which is absolutely incredible. And I'll show you an example on the next slide. So we recently run a campaign with one of our nano influencers. Beth only has 1,000 followers, only has 10 posts, but we run a campaign using one of our nano influencers, and these are some of the results that we got. Key stats, as I mentioned, 1,000 followers. She put out a story, and she had 270 story views and 190 click-throughs. That's a whopping 70% conversion. And if you can think about how can you leverage these nano influencers in parallel? How can you get 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 or perhaps even 50 or 100 of these to really, really take action? One thing about us on social media, especially on Instagram, is that we will watch everyone's story. I will watch all my friends' story. I will check them out. I will see what my friends are up to on holiday. We're very nosy. So I think that's why the whole nano influencer technique really does work, and we get lots of great engagement because of that. Really interesting stat as well is, lots of brands, have increased their spending on influencer marketing. I think £442 million has now been spent in the last quarter, which is up, I think, 18% to the last previous quarter, which is absolutely amazing. And here's one of the case studies that I was really excited to show you. So here's how PwC have leveraged nano influencers and actually people within their team to take us, Gen Z, on a journey and really give us some unique insight as to what the organization is about. So here you've got Jamie. Jamie starts off this Instagram story by introducing us to who he is. So it's Jamie, PwC tech degree apprentice from University of Birmingham. He tells you he's in London, and he takes us on a journey, right? He takes us on a journey. He introduces himself. Then we can see Tower Bridge in the background. That's where he is. My 10-week placement is in London. You're shown a very scenic picture of London. Then you're taken to the office where you meet some of his mates, right? So we are now invested in Jamie. We're really excited to follow his journey. And through that, he's exposing a lot about what PwC are actually doing. And then it continues. He takes us to his canteen. Right, we're taking that journey. That journey continues now. We're in his canteen. We can see the beans and bacon and toast, and that looks scrumptious. I mean, wow, goodness me. And then he then stops and explains more about his role. Right, so we've been taking on this really systematic journey, and then we stop at a certain point where Jamie is explaining to us, this is what I do in my tech apprentice degree. Right? This is what, and he says actually quite there, PwC pay for our tuition fees and we're on a salary year round, which is another way of really getting some of the benefits of working at your organization through Instagram story. And then he ends it with a call to action. But we've been through that journey and we're invested, which means we'll actually click through and get to the end. At the end, you've got the call to action, which just says, follow PwC. Sometimes you can even have a call to action that just says apply here. And that goes into the bio on Instagram, and people can actually apply. So when you're creating content that attracts us to your organization, think about how you can take us on a journey. Right? How can you find unique ways of engaging us to your organization? Instagram has some great tools where you can, implement some quizzes on there. Ask us some questions about your organization or the industry in general, and take us on that journey. So I'm going to end my talk off with 5 social tools which you need to be using to attract and engage us to your organization. So has anybody heard of BuzzSumo at all? Anyone? Fantastic, quite a few people. So BuzzSumo is a fantastic tool that allows you to search the internet and the web essentially for influencers in different spaces. So if you're a tech recruiter and you're looking for the best tech influencers, BuzzSumo is a great tool which allows you to really tap into that community of people within that influence. And a lot of people within the marketing space use BuzzSumo day in, day out to really get themselves into the conversation. Google Trends, anyone use Google Trends at all? A couple, interesting. So Google Trends is a fantastic tool which allows you to jump onto live trends. An important thing to know about Gen Z is if you really, really want to get us to love what you do, or to have an affinity with the organization, try and find ways in which you can embed yourself in culture. How can you find interesting ways to embed yourself into Gen Z culture? And Google Trends is a great way of doing that. In fact, Amazon are a great example of this. They use, I think, Google Trends and a few other tools to jump onto a trend. Has anybody heard of Alex from Glassdoor? Anyone? Alex, quite a few people. So Alex from Glassdoor was, I think it was about 17 or 18. He skipped school to go to Glastonbury, and an artist at Glastonbury was literally like, hey, can anybody come on stage and sing with me? And Alex was like, yeah, I can do it. He came on stage and sang a song with the artist. I think he went from about a couple of hundred followers to, I think, 284,000 followers just after, I think, just a couple of days ago. And Amazon jumped onto that trend, and they did a campaign with him where they got him to speak to an Amazon Alexa. Sales just skyrocketed. But that's just an example of how you can really jump into Gen Z trends and culture to really implement your brand affinity. Buffer, anybody use Buffer at all? Yeah, couple people. So Buffer is a tool that allows you to schedule a lot of your posts. So with us, creative, graphic content really does work. Anything that's eye-catching. In fact, we run a small case study where we posted some pictures on our social channels, and we posted some video. And what we found was there was a 4,000% increase in engagement with video as compared to photo. So Buffer is a tool where you can consistently, schedule the posts and stagger them across a different time. But I think more importantly, the way we use it is that we use it to measure performance. So is a post performing well? Once it's posted, is it doing well? If it's not doing well, we iterate. We look at the data and we find ways in which we can dive into the analytics and then iterate and change that. They also have another free tool called it's called Buffer Stories. So on Instagram, like I mentioned, really prominent. 60% of Instagram users are actually on Story. Buffer offers a free tool where you can go on Buffer Stories, and they've got these really creative and graphic templates which you can use to post an Instagram story and engage with us across Instagram Story. Canva, I'm sure people have used Canva before. Great tool. A lot of times we find as recruiters, we might not have a graphic designer on our team. Might not have somebody that can do graphic design, but this is another free tool that has over 2 million photos within their library. It's got photos and graphics and templates that you can use on social, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Story. But essentially, you go in there, type in the design that you want to actually invest in, and you can change or edit any of that text to whatever you like. And you can post that on social, post that on your stories, and post that across different social channels. And the last one is Animoto. Anybody use or has heard of Animoto? Nobody. This is one of our secret tools that we really invest a lot of our time in. So what you can do with Animoto is you can combine pictures, video, and text and create stunning videos in seconds. In fact, it's one of the most used tools with marketers across the globe. It's one of the most trusted tools. What this allows you to do is, if you have a blog that you want to summarize, if you've written a great blog and you want to summarize that into pictures and videos, capture the best bits into a video, put all the different elements, put the text, put the pictures, all your stats into Animoto, and what comes out is a great video, which you can post on social. You can optimize it to post on Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, and allows people to digest the article that you've written, especially for our audience. So, to conclude, some key takeaways from my talk is be authentic in your messaging. Remember, at the end of the day, we want to work for organizations that are authentic in how they communicate with us and how they reach with us. Build community based on value. What I mean by that is really invest in giving us value. How can you find pain points that we actually experience, and how can you be an organization that actually solves those problems for us? And leverage social tools and influencers. How can you leverage the tools that I've just gone through to reach us, and how can you really tap into influencers? How can you leverage nano influencers or micro influencers in your strategy? One thing I should really mention is brands are using influencers a lot, But in recruitment, we haven't really seen that prominence or that takeoff with influencers, especially nano influencers. So here is an opportunity for you guys to actually go out there and go into. So just to finish off, in the war for Gen Z talent, it's the companies who can communicate their message by embedding themselves into Gen Z culture that will ultimately succeed in attracting us to their organizations. Thank you guys so much.